cheated. You haven't played the game right. I'll show you.
You've got a lot to learn about winning.
You always stop me when I'm having fun.
Welcome back to another episode of Ars Ludica, where I ramble about some topic about board games for a few minutes. And in the first few episodes, we've been talking about the different schools of board game design, at least as interpreted by Oliver Kiley in a blog post on Board Game Geek. As usual, the link is in the description. I encourage you to check it out. In the first episode, we talked about Ameritrash, and the second, we talked about German family games. And I've made the point that despite the geographic references in those titles, modern versions of these genres are not tied to one specific region of the world. However, in the 90s and before, that wasn't always the case. While it could be argued that Sid Sackson designed German-style games and Games Workshop designed Ameritrash games, these genres have historic roots in a certain part of the world, and the current names reference that fact. But what would happen when those two worlds collide? You get Eurogames. Again, today, Eurogames are designed the world over, but many of the first really popular concoctions of this genre can be found in the early 2000s in the hands of European designers. German games, known for their mechanical elegance, smashed into American tolerance for having a lot of rules. So the question arose, what happens if we took the basic idea of a German game and added a bunch more rules? Thus was born the Eurogame. Now, seeds of this genre go back as far as Sid Sackson with Acquire, or perhaps something like D. Macher. But it was really in the early 2000s, with games like The Princes of Florence and Caylus, that this genre really took off, and in the minds of many hobby gamers is the default genre of games. If you go to Board Game Geek and search the top 100 games, the vast majority of them will be a Eurogame. But really, what is this genre about? Challenge. Now, when we say challenge, we don't necessarily mean competition or conflict. Now, oftentimes, the challenge can come from simply manipulating a complex system of mechanisms. It comes from having to balance tactics with strategy. Sometimes the challenge just comes from rules internalization and just experimenting with how all the gears and levers work together in a game. If Ameritrash is the stand-up dice roll and German games are the family game night, then this is the group of gamers sitting around a table with their head in their hands as they puzzle out something on the board. So how do we achieve this? Today we'll talk about 3 tenets. Number 1, intricacy and mechanics. In Eurogames, theme is somewhat of an afterthought. The focus is usually on the mechanics. While an Ameritrash game might get buzz because of how richly it implements its theme, Eurogames would get buzz due to some cool, innovative dice placement mechanic, or a different take on the rondel, or an interesting twist on worker placement. Mechanics come first, and the fun of the game is learning how these systems interact, and the subsystems and the sub-subsystems work together like gears on a clock. That's not to say that Eurogames can't have theme. Vitel Lacerda is known for thematic games, but the theme is there as an aid to parsing the mechanisms. The mechanisms are not necessarily there to aid the theme. Brings us to tenet number 2, competitiveness. There's an old Rainer Knizia quote that gets trotted out often here, where he said, when playing a game, the goal is to win. But it's the goal that's important, not the winning. What this means is that everyone should be trying their best to win at the table. That's the goal of the game. However, one should not be a sore loser or sore winner because the actual result is not important. However, this is kind of the rallying call of the Eurogamer. We are in this game for competition. That's where the challenge is at. Therefore, in Eurogames, more than any other genre, fairness and balance are big deals. You win or lose based upon your own decisions, and not the decisions of some random factor. Eurogames will often tout having low randomness, as a feature. Also, player interaction has to be tightly reined in to a certain degree. You could probably categorize this further, though, into something like old school Euros and new school Euros. Modern Euros tend to be a little more player versus the game instead of player versus player. The winner tends to be who can game the system more, who can work out the most efficient path to victory, who's the most adept at pulling the levers in this abstract puzzle, who can internalize the rules quicker. So directed attacks are not usually a highlight in these games, something that's kind of carried over from the German family games. Tenet number 3 is control and constraint. Eurogames strive to give everyone an equal and balanced playing field in a somewhat controlled environment where there is predictability from one session to the next. The game happens on the board. The unpredictability of what other players can do is somewhat contained and can't sour the experience too much. This again is an attempt to control some of the chaos that other players could provide. For that reason, these games can be enjoyable even with complete strangers. Whatever personality quirks or playstyles people may have, it's filtered through what they can do on the board. Other factors, such as turn order, are a bigger deal in Eurogames. You don't want anyone to have an unfair advantage, so these games will often find a way to balance first turn advantage. Additionally, this is the genre where if there is something like asymmetric powers, there's a great concern with balancing them out. Players will look at play data and will buff or debuff factions if one seems to be winning too much. Cards might receive errata or be completely removed if it's determined that they're giving players an unfair advantage. Additionally, and again, this is a generalization, but many of the strategies tend to be baked into the board. If you hear talk about the wheat strategy or the building strategy as being the best way to go, it's probably a Euro game. There tend to be a few pathways you can navigate, and whoever is best at optimizing those pathways will often win the game. So to conclude, a Euro game is a box of mechanisms and puzzles where the enjoyment is exploring the gears and levers that it provides. The fun is in the competitiveness of who can figure out these puzzles the best, and things that take away control, like randomness and too much player interaction, are typically reduced. As usual, I like to give a few examples of the genre. To start with, I'll give you Agricola. It's one that I enjoy. Actually, it's still, as far as Euro games go, is pretty tense. It's a worker placement. We have a review on it if you'd like to watch that. Next one I'll give is Power Grid. It definitely sits in the Euro game camp, although I feel like this is a good intro to something like economic games. Again, a lot of interaction, and it's still something that I appreciate in my games. A more modern example of a Euro game would be something like Scythe. Don't let the theme fool you. This may look like an Ameritrash game, but it is a Euro game through and through. And if you really, really want to just dive into a box of mechanisms and tools and complexity, check out a Vital Lacerda game. I recommend Vino here, but really just look at any of his games and find the one where the theme interests you the most. So that's it for this episode. Next time, we'll be talking about war games.